In this tutorial, we're going to connect vCAC 5.1 to vCenter. The first thing we need to do is to set up the credentials that we're going to use to connect to the vCenter server. You do that by going to vCAC Administrator, Credentials, and then saying New Credentials. I'm going to put in the name of my vCenter server so I know which server the credentials are for. And click the little green checkbox. Next, we need to set up an endpoint. And the endpoint is what allows us to determine what we're going to communicate with and how we're going to communicate with it. So you can see we have a number of different endpoints here: Amazon EC2, UCS, vCloud, vCO, vSphere, and a number of others, including Hyper-V. So if we click on the vSphere vCenter endpoint, again, I'm going to put in the name of my VC so I know which vCenter this endpoint is in relationship to. And then we want to put in the address for the vCenter server. You can also use IP address in this field, but I recommend using the fully qualified host name. And once you put that in at the end, we need to append it with /SDK. So essentially we need to have the SDK address for the vCenter server plugged into the address, and then we need to match this up to the credentials that we just created. We're going to say OK. Now that we have an endpoint created, we can go back to our installation medium, and we want to install the vCAC agent setup. I'm going to run this as administrator. Go ahead and say next, accept those terms. We're going to give the agent a name, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to name it after my vCenter server, just because it allows me, from a troubleshooting perspective, to understand if I have multiple agents talking to multiple vCenters, which one it is that I'm working with. Again, here, much like the DEMS, we're not doing an HTTPS install, so we need to put the ports in. But here we're going to do port 80 for both. And it tells you right up here. We're going to choose the vSphere agent, which is the default. And we're going to give it a service to run under. Service account, I should say. And we have to put in the model manager credentials. Again, these are the credentials that have access to communicate to the model manager. In my case, they're all the same service account. And then it wants to know the vSphere generic endpoint. Now, this is going to be the name of the endpoint that you configured when you set up your endpoint. In my case, it's the name of the VC server. I'm going to click Next and Install. Once our installation is complete, click Finish. Now what's going to happen here is the proxy agent is going to go out and try and communicate with vCenter using the credentials that we plugged in when we created the credential set. Once it successfully communicates with vCenter, it's also then going to communicate with the vCAC server. We can check to see when this happens by going to this agent configuration section and clicking this little drop down box right here. Once the agent has made successful communications to both vCenter and the vCAC server, its name will show up in this drop down list. Now we don't need to do any configuration within here. It's just a handy way to tell if your agent's communicating or not. And sometimes this can take a minute to 2 minutes for it to actually complete all the communications necessary and show up in the list. Alright, and so there's our agent showing up on the proxy agent name, so that tells me that the agent was able to communicate with vCenter and communicate back to vCAC. Now, during this time, the agent, when it talks to vCenter, it's doing a very high-level discovery. It's looking at just what clusters exist in that vCenter environment and pulling that information into vCAC. What we can do from here is actually create an enterprise group. Enterprise groups are, think of them as your infrastructure administrators. So an example of what you could use enterprise groups for would be, let's say you have vCenter administrators in North America, and you have a group of vCenter administrators in EMEA. You could create an enterprise group for each and assign them each their own respective set of hardware that they're responsible for. So here, I'm going to call this my vSphere admins, and here's my 2 clusters that are available within my vCenter. I'm actually going to enable both of those for management, and then I'm going to make myself an enterprise administrator. Once I do this, what will end up happening is vCAC will then go back to the agent and say, hey, I want to take these 2 clusters under management, go and do a deeper discovery of both of these clusters for me. What it'll do then is gather all the CPU, memory, disk, network configurations within those clusters and bring them into vCAC so we can utilize them for compute resources. So once they do their discovery, we can go into this new menu item you'll see here now called Enterprise Administrators, and we can go to Compute Resources. And what we'll see here is both of our clusters listed. And of course, I'm seeing 0 information for each right now, which tells me that it's still going out and doing its discovery of those environments. Once that discovery is complete, you'll actually see how much memory exists, how much storage exists, and you can actually drill in and take a look at the data stores and things like that. But we'll cover that a lot more in depth in another tutorial. And so this is going to conclude our tutorial on connecting vCAC to vCenter. Thank you for watching.